Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. Those of you who've been listening to me for quite some time know that I often try to reach out to other people and to sort of enliven and broaden the dialogue that we have with regard to our place in the universe and how we get here and sort of the logic of what makes us all tick, so to speak. And in that endeavor, I sometimes introduce other people to come and speak with me about topics that I find to be interesting and enlightening for all of us. And that's sort of my goal, is to sort of help people understand what we're up against and how to best navigate the troubled waters we live in sometimes. Because, you know, we are obviously, not just today, but over our lives, we have a very difficult time navigating our lives, and we try to find the best way we can do that. And so it's interesting to do that. My guest today is Dr. Johan Calleman, and he's just written a book called Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. So that obviously caught my eye and piqued my curiosity. And so I'm delighted to have Dr. Calleman on here today. His website is www.calleman, it's CALLEMAN.com. He is a doctor in physical biology, and we're going to be discussing his new work coming up. And it's great to have you on today with the show today, Dr. Calleman. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm looking forward to this. We'll chat about broad topics, I hope.
Yes. Well, just an interesting note. I'm sort of wondering how the construct of the pineal gland and how it relates to Mayan cosmology and sort of this multidimensional reality. To me, multidimensional reality means that there's sort of like a parallel universe, I guess you might say, where we have, realms of what we see in the visible, tangible world each day, where we can touch and feel things, and then there's this other world that we can enter into, either through the use of a outside source or through perhaps other forms of, divination tools, perhaps, whatever. But I'm curious as to the connection between these.
Yeah, I would agree exactly with how you describe a multi-dimensional reality. And, I think a first thing we should notice is that when it comes to many indigenous or shamanically oriented peoples, they really have a worldview which is multidimensional. They don't just see this sort of physical default state reality that most modern people would. Mm-hmm. And instead, as you're saying, it seems like there is a parallel universe going on, a kind of a spirit world that is essentially distinct from what we see on what we call our physical world. Then, given that connection between maybe ancient and indigenous peoples and a multi-dimensional reality, it's become interesting for me, and this is really what my life's work from approximately 1993 or even 1979, is to connect one cosmology originating from such a shamanic people, which is that of the Maya, mm-hmm. and see how that applies to, for instance, the situation of psychedelic effects. And but also, as you pointed out, a lot of people are sensitive to spiritual influences seemingly coming from some other world than the one that we normally live in. So that is sort of the starting point, that to explore how the Maya would look upon this kind of multidimensional reality. And this then also leads into the whole phenomenon of quantum theory, different states of consciousness, as I talk about. And so to backtrack a little bit when it comes to the Maya, one thing we know about them is that they built big pyramids that were mostly built in 9 levels. And it seems like to them those 9 levels were what we with modern terminology would talk about as 9 quantum states, or each creating a kind of world of experience for the human beings. And so what the shaman kings that of old would do was that they would climb these pyramids of 9 levels and come to the top. And that really was a kind of an enactment of going through these various worlds created by 9 quantum levels, you might say. And that then, that's the basic background to my work.
Yeah.
And then I should say that model has been, at least in my own view, tremendously fruitful. And so this is my 7th book about ultimately going back to the Mayan calendar.
Right.
And applied in this particular case, though, to the kind of state of consciousness, the altered state of consciousness that people are getting into when they use psychedelics, and that includes myself to some degree.
Right. Do you think that when you refer to the Mayans and they use psychedelics, correct?
Yeah, as far as we know.
As far as we know. How do you think they came to know that? How do you think that they came to know that a select set of plants or a select set of ingredients brought to here by the earth or by nature would produce this? How do you think they learned that? Was that something that you think that was passed down from some, or is it some sort of an unusual effect? I mean, you would probably be privy to this in some way because of being a physical biologist. I mean, how would they have learned that this was going to work for them?
Well, I mean, one way of saying it is trial and error, maybe.
Right, I know, I understand that.
And in this case, what we know from the ancient Maya, and that's the ones I'm talking about, is that we found hundreds and hundreds of different artifacts, which are like mushroom men. Right. It's a mushroom growing out of a human being or something like that. So we have reasons to believe that a significant psychedelic influence was from mushrooms.
Right.
Now, so if you eat all the mushrooms, you will die from some of them, and you will be eating a good meal from others, and then you'll be transported to another world through a third kind of mushrooms. The mushrooms has a variety of effects. But I also think that there was a time, these different quantum states that the Mayan pyramids are symbolic of, they reflect each level, each state sort of reflects a different relationship of the human beings to reality. It's like we download different quantum states, and then we see things differently, we perceive things differently. Right. And I do think there was a time before civilization began, before 5,000 years ago, when people were much more just in tune with all the nature, everything in nature, really. Right. And so that they could probably have gotten some kind of direct guidance to, from the source of these quantum states, saying that, that's so good, if you try that mushroom, you'll get to a different world. And there are, when it comes to mushroom, you can argue that that's really just trial and error, and it's not too far-fetched to suggest that. But when it comes to ayahuasca, where you have to combine two different you have to boil the components of different kinds of plants in the jungle. That's much more hard to explain just by trial and error. There must
Yes.
be
Yeah.
some profound connection between these plants and the human beings that overall we've lost at the current time, I think,
Right.
but they had it.
I've heard this mentioned before that this sort of recipe for this concoction had to have been taught to the Mayans by via the plants themselves. Now that isn't seems like a bit of a stretch, but perhaps there's no other explanation because why would you take things that are disparate and not at all alike and mix them together into a concoction that does not taste that well, and then
Yes, exactly.
expect to have a better process happening? What would there had to be some sort of compelling logic to do this? And maybe it was a form of torture. I don't know. I mean, how would someone come up with this? I mean, is it within
Right.
reason to think that the plants could have taught this to humans?
Well, I think, there's a lot of talk today about more about the intelligence of plants, and
Hmm.
it's just not the intelligence that we're used to. And if humans are in a different state of consciousness than we are now, I can imagine that you are being taught things, and I do say taught within quotation, but
Right.
you just however it works,
Hmm.
you assimilate some information
Yeah, there
from
had to
the
be some sort of
plants.
motive to make that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's fascinating,
yeah.
and then when you look at that, and you'd have to think that they were trying to achieve, trying to find some sort of divine guidance or some divine answer to why life exists. I mean, why would there be this pursuit to sort of alter their
Yeah.
mental state?
Well, that could be there could be many answers to that, though. I mean, um, one thing is, of course, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to begin with.
Right.
Um, I've done these ayahuasca ceremonies and some other plants, and it's just fascinating. It's and then what we now know also from a lot of recent studies in modern universities is that they are many of these psychedelics are actually healing. They are
Right. Right.
therapeutically used, and it's actually amazingly successful. I think it surprised even the researchers that have been doing this themselves. And so they found, for instance, then that there are certain mental conditions that we look upon negatively, like depression, like addiction,
Hmm.
like obsessive compulsive behavior, and
PTSD. Yeah.
PTSD. And more recently, then they're starting now to study also eating disorders like anorexia and so
Okay.
forth.
Hmm.
So there seems to be a healing possibility. Certainly, and in the appropriate circumstances, if it's used in so forth. So that might have been a reason by itself. But then I think there is also. Uh, we tend to think and I'm thinking of us in the modern world, so to speak. We tend to think of this, rational mind as the default for our existence, really, and
Right. Right.
and
Right.
then we alter that. But there are still, like Bushmen in Kalahari Desert that are still living with a worldview where they're trance. They don't take psychedelics, but they dance themselves for days into a trance and
Hmm.
come to a different world. And to them, that's the default. And the normal, what we call normal, that's kind of altered. So
Right.
when they are making decisions, and maybe I'm talking about the way it was. 100 years ago or so, because nothing stays the same in these states. But when they do making decisions, for instance, if they're going to hunt a particular eland, which is a antelope that they hunt, then they will have to ask for permission to do so, and they do that in the altered state, what we would call
I see.
altered
Yeah. So
state.
they're getting an information feed that's perhaps different,
Right.
that's tapping into something that might be part of their DNA or that has been handed down from centuries of human evolution. That could be, I believe that we are sort of born into the world and with this being preloaded of some, like you might buy a computer with the operating system on it, and in there is a certain set of instructions and personality traits and characteristics, all of which I can see through the astrology. And other people get there through different angles. But these things all, if this information is sort of embedded in there, and this is simply a manner of waking that up, it might provide us with a new sense of order. And I think probably their logic was to try to make sense of what life was all about, correct? I mean, it was more there's actually this human search to find meaning and value in life, and I guess whatever means it takes to get there is what you use.
Yeah, and the meaning I think they gained was really then coming back to the Bushmen. They thought of God, whatever they meant by God, which not necessarily the same as we would, but the God was living in that world that they came into after a lot of trance dancing, so to speak.
Yeah,
and of course,
that's often the case.
Being with God will give them purpose and meaning and so forth.
Right. And I've often heard it said that people who are in a altered state, their purpose of the rationale behind being in an altered state is to become closer with a God of sorts, God with a small g.
Yeah, it is. And, one of the interesting aspects of these recent research that have been performed in Western universities into the work of psychedelics. And I just mentioned the kinds of positive effects that they found. But what they do find, and this is almost the point, is that the more of a spiritual experience the people report as having when they take psilocybin under these controlled situations, the more of a spiritual experience, the more effective is the therapy.
Right.
So if people go into that and they see strange things, but they don't feel that there is a spiritual connection, then it's not at all as effective therapeutically as if they do have. And I think that's part of this. We like to, if we have a spiritual experience in that kind of altered state, we feel there is meaning to it, and if there is meaning to it, that then the healing will also be a meaningful thing, and that's I think how we put things together.
Right, and I think that in Western society, whereas in another society, perhaps maybe the Bushmen, as you mentioned, or perhaps the Mayans, their quest for this was more of a spiritual quest versus, say, a modern day society, which might look at this as entertainment in some ways, and that's a huge difference. And even though if someone takes LSD, and I took it when I was younger, back in the '60s. I did it at the time, not thinking I was doing anything for spiritual pursuit. I was just trying to be a hippie at the time, and just trying to find out what was going on. And I know that my time there, I know that I had experiences back then that totally changed my view of life. Matter of fact, one of my things that I do, I'm an artist, a mandala artist, and it was during that time when I was having that experience that I discovered mandalas. I saw them on the wall. And I saw these figures, and it was sort of like an opening of my mind to a different way of thinking and looking through a different lens, which I found it really altered my whole trajectory.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and you didn't plan for that, but you got
I didn't
it.
plan for it at all. I didn't go into it with the idea of saying, "Oh, I'm going to find something." No, this just sort of happened to me. I was just staring at the wall, as one does in a state like that, and all of a sudden, these mandalas began to appear. I was probably about 18 at the time, and then they came back to revisit me. After my wife passed away in 2001. So this was sort of a return to me, and they came back to soothe my soul at that time, my very battered soul at the time. They came back in a form and reacquainted themselves with me
in a way that helped me heal. So it's almost as if I had a sneak preview back then of where I was going to be, which I think is logical with regard to time and distance and place and where we are within this realm. We don't, we may very well know that our whole destiny is embedded in our minds already. We already know that that's there. Maybe we don't know that. And this was just a way of awakening that sense of myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And mandalas are interesting in this context, I think, because I don't, I'm not an expert, of course, but many of the mandalas I have seen are basically organized in from a center, and then that are partitioned in 8 different sections, you might say.
Right. That's a typical Tibetan Buddhist mandala, yes, yeah.
Right. And I'm sure there's varieties and so forth. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular thing is very significant in Mayan cosmology. We don't really have any mandalas from the Maya, but we do have a very interesting description from, the Mayan way. In other words, these 9 levels of consciousness that the pyramids symbolize, they're all brought to us by waves, each one of them a particular wave with a particular frequency emanating from the center of the universe.
Right.
Now, what happened when 3,115 years before Christ, which began something called the long count of the Maya. In other words, their chronology that they dated everything, all the pyramids and so forth, mm-hmm. in terms of. But then people have been wondering for a long time, why did they set the beginning of this chronology at that particular time? Because even it's a little bit mysterious, because it does coincide with the rise of a different civilization in other places in the world, in Egypt, Sumeria, and the Indus Valley. But they describe, actually in the site of Palenque, which is probably the most beautiful of the Mayan pyramid sites, they describe specifically what happened at that date 3,115, when their chronology began. Mm-hmm. And what it says there is that something they call in the place of creation, which is a sort of the cosmic source of all the waves that are coming in to influence our mind and so forth. Mm-hmm. In that place of creation, an 8 partitioning appeared. So an 8 partitioning structure became evident in the place of creation at this point in time. And then we know that it's only from that point in time, essentially, that humans are starting to portray straight lines, perpendicular lines, and even 8 partitioned pyramids. Mm-hmm.
And there's something very natural about that. When we look at geometry, and we use geometry as a tool in our lives, or we even recognize that we can see how valuable it is and how ever present it is. It's omniscient. Yeah. Everything is tied to geometry, which then gives logic to the structure of the universe, the structure of the cosmos, and it gives, because it's all within a mathematical construct that holds this all together. And there's a beauty in there. There's a certain mathematical beauty in there, even in the alignment of the planets and the cycles in which they turn. There's a wonderful dance between the Earth and Venus that creates a five-pointed star, which looks just like a mandala, and it's this wonderful structure that is all mathematically precise and predictable, and yet it's all part of what the natural science is. So this may simply be our interpretation of the way the cosmos is actually put together in some way.
Or it is the way that the cosmos is actually being created from the cosmic center.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we are just the agents of that cosmic plan, manifesting it on our planet here.
Right. And we're seeking for some sort of explanation for that as to how this logic works, and that's part of the great pursuit of having purpose and meaning and trying to make this life make sense, because it can't just be walking down the street and saying hello to your neighbor. There's got to be much more to that. There's got to be more to life than just the mundane that we see on a daily basis. And it's fascinating to me because the concept that somehow this was handed, like the plants actually had intelligence, and which I can actually wrap my head around that. I can accept that, and that they brought this to us in some sort of a format, and for them to, in many ways, we're regressing. We're not going forward, as they seem to be much further along the road with regard to consciousness and cosmic, validity than we are at this point in our lives. But I think that's your point, is bringing this back to the surface, which is really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you think the minds are, and this is particular, I mean, this extends, I understood that ayahuasca came out of the Amazon, but I suspect that this was. Yeah.
It does.
But this is a string of cultures that were connected via a land mass, so that information could travel back and forth. But when you see the same sort of phenomenon happen in a different part of the world where there isn't this sort of easy transport between, so the information couldn't be easily shared 5,000 years ago. You're not going to have somebody in Brazil talking to somebody in China about how to make ayahuasca, even though they may have a similar sort of process, right?
Yeah.
This had to happen concurrently.
Yeah.
Just the way the pyramids in Egypt did, this happened concurrently with, say, perhaps the Mayan pyramids. They were not connected, other than the fact that they were both humans and on the same planet, but yet they had the same sort of approach.
Yeah. And so that gets its explanation. The explanation that I'm providing for that is that these cosmic quantum states that we download through a resonance with different waves, we download them simultaneously all over the planet. So what that means is that you shouldn't be surprised if you see pyramidal structures that are similar in Peru, in Iran, and in Indonesia,
right?
Because it's the same structure, the same geometry, and then of course we have some co-creativity here. We will set our particular cultural color on them in different parts of the world, but basically it is the downloading from a cosmic source that synchronizes a lot of evolution on our planet.
Yeah.
And you find it also in a lot of myths, a lot of mythology.
Yes.
Not only in architecture, but in the mythology too. And you get these themes like the tree of life that everywhere in the planet. You'd be hard pressed to find any culture that doesn't recognize the tree of life. Mm-hmm. And that's because we're actually the frameworks for how we understand reality, I would say, are downloaded. They're not produced by inside our heads. They're produced by our brains downloading certain geometries that color how we perceive reality.
So do you think they were downloaded, or do you think they were pre-baked? Did we come preloaded with this information? This is simply a matter of awakening.
I see. Yeah, I think they're downloaded. Mm-hmm. I don't think we come. I don't think it is in our biological bodies, so to speak. I think it's downloaded.
And so then we work from off that platform. Yeah, that's interesting. We are talking today with Dr. Carl Johan Calleman. He's has a doctorate degree in physical biology, and we're talking about his new book called Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes. In the meantime, I suggest you visit his website, www.calleman.com. That's CALLEMAN.com, and check out his work. He's got a workshop coming up there, and I encourage you to look into that. And his book, when will your book be out, Dr. John?
Oh, it's out. It's already out.
It's already out. Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mayan Cosmology. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back to finish our discussion.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Dr. Johan Calleman, and he is a PhD in physical biology. He's just created a book. His most recent book is Quantum Science of Psychedelics, the Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and Mind Cosmology. And we're discussing the idea of, this desire, this sort of innate human desire to seek purpose, to seek a new view of life. Where it's almost as if we're not satisfied with this sort of daily grunt of role of life that we have to trod through, and we want to find a higher meaning. We almost have to think as if, and this seems to be a pattern in. And since humanity first crawled out of the primordial ooze, I guess, there seems to have been this desire to find this logic, to understand how it works. And it's your work, Dr. Calleman, that is helping us get there through your research and the use of it. And I think that what I find interesting, I've had guests on before, and we've talked about ayahuasca, and one of the things that the person I spoke with was, he was of the opinion that the plants actually taught this to us, and there is this this theory that in the natural world, and you probably are much more familiar with this, wherever there is a poison, they say that the antidote is right next to it in some way or in the neighborhood. Is that correct?
Oh, I wouldn't know that. I haven't heard that.
Okay. Well, that seems to be the case in some things. I've heard that from perhaps Native American who would use a different kind of, if you find poison ivy, and then right next to poison ivy is, I think what's called jewelweed, which you use to be an antidote, or milk pod. And those things sort of live in a sort of like you would probably explain, a yin and yang duality of one supplanting and helping the other in this sort of perpetual sort of almost digital, black and white, 1 and 0 sort of process where there's this whole thing of a duality, this great duality. We all seem to be wrapped in this duality and it's sort of that charge, that negative positive charge that keeps the whole thing swirling.
Mm-hmm.
And when you speak of the tree of life, can you elaborate a little bit about that when you refer to that?
Well, the first thing I think is to notice that this is it's a idea or an experience or a notion that is widely shared around the world. I've seen it myself from the Maori in New Zealand to the Maya in Guatemala, and they had it in Africa. They had the baobab tree as the
Right. I remember that. Yeah.
and in my native Scandinavia, the Vikings would had a huge ash that's called Yggdrasil, which was bigger than the whole sky and the whole earth and so forth. And they believed that the gods would gather in council every morning under this particular tree, because that's really the creator of the universe in many ancient traditions. And usually this idea of a tree of life is linked to some kind of a serpent, and is certainly among the Maya, who had a very time-based view of the tree of life, but they also had a connection to something called the plumed serpent. And that, as I understand it, is simply in modern language, is a quantum wave. If you think about it, if you were living in times when there were no trigonometric tables, no computer programs, and you wanted to somehow create a symbol for a sine wave, then you would have to choose a serpent, because that's
the sine wave. Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty much the only thing you have, and so that. These are connected, and most people have probably heard about the connection to the tree of life and the serpent in the Bible, in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. But I do think it's important to point out, though, that in the biblical story, God, as they say, curses the serpent. He's the bad guy, so to speak, and in the Christian tradition, it takes over that view and thinks of the serpent as the devil. And I think what's important to realize is that this is even if this is the sort of religion that has become the basis for the Western civilization, the modern Western civilization, it's pretty unique. In other words, other countries and cultures, they honored this plumed serpent. And the biggest pyramids in Mexico, and we're talking about huge pyramids in Teotihuacan, Cholula, Chichen Itza, they dedicated to this plumed serpent. That was their highest divinity. And you have that in several other traditions, from the rainbow serpent in Australia, and the Amazonas. They had the great anaconda that was the creator of the human beings. And so anyway, I would say that not only the tree of life, but also the connected serpent is like a ubiquitous symbol in ancient human traditions. And so what to make of it? I think many hear the biblical story of it and then think, oh, they had some strange ideas in old times and so forth. But in reality, this was a profound reality that they were living with. And the way I translate it into modern scientific language is then that the serpent is a wave, and emanating from a huge geometry in the center of the universe, which is what was called then the tree of life.
I see.
That's the when I talked about the 8 partitioning, the kind of a mandala that comes from the center of the universe, then that is the center of the tree of life, actually. And this, something I developed in my recent book, is that there is modern science is starting to identify a huge axis throughout the universe. We're not talking about a small-scale galaxy or something like that. We're talking about an axis that encompasses the entire universe. And several satellites have verified the existence of this kind of a basic line, or basic axis on the largest level of the universe. Huh. And I think that is really then what the ancients were talking about. And but they were not so interested in sort of how the universe might have been structured astronomically, but they were certainly interested in how did these geometries emanating from this, how do they affect them, how do they affect life, and so forth. And so that's my view. I think it's the reason that this was such an ubiquitous symbol in ancient times is that there is a reality behind it, and on the largest cosmic level. And this is something modern science is now starting to discover.
Mm. And do you think that, yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, we're sort of behind where they were years,
Yeah.
Thousands of years ago. We're sort of behind, but our approach is much different. We're much more scientific in that regard. Yeah. But do you think that the using this sort of the psychedelic as a trigger to open up these doors in people, do you think that is the downloading process? That is the vehicle? That's the conduit for the download?
No, my interpretation is almost like it's the other. Well, I should say, let me just say like this, that what happened 5,100 years ago, what the Maya talked about as the eight partitioning, was that humans started to download a mind that was compartmentalized, ultimately in these eight sections that symbolized by a mandala, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And once their mind got structured like that, they everything came into existence, like writing, like calendars, like pyramids, like cities, and so forth, because all of that required a structured mind, really. What I do believe happens when we take psychedelics is that compartmentalization that we live with in a normal state is disengaged. And so we become receptive to the other frequencies that are of the other waves that are emanating from the center of the universe. And then we get sort of the full broad spectrum of experiencing belonging to all of these 9 waves. But the reason is really then that there is you might say, a biochemical effect of the psychedelic that disengages the mind from the brain. And because the mind is a download, really. The mind is a download, and once that happens, we get open to the whole spectrum, and then we become receptive to all kinds of spiritual or influences and strange worlds and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, sort of alters our perceptions in a way that broadens our experience into introducing whole new modalities of understanding, whole new modalities of logic, whole new modalities of purpose, and so forth. And this is a very profound kind of experience, because I think what it does is it opens up your minds in ways that we might not have been exposed to, and it's very powerful, because it seems as if it's, especially if it's coming from the earth, if it's not a man-made product, but something from the earth. Well, of course, I guess all things are from the earth eventually, but more this sort of this natural process of allowing this to happen and bringing it into a state where you can really stretch completely and understand. And I imagine that its effect is it broadens the mind to the place where you actually can form a logical explanation of what the universe is trying to tell us and what we are here for. That's sort of the underlying purpose, right?
Well, I would think something like that. I think, once you have disengaged this compartmentalized mind,
Right.
you get open to all kinds of things, and some people come out of this feeling they've had profound insights, and I think they have, because then the usual structuring of the mind really shuts a lot of things out. That's what really our mind do. Our normal, rational, geometric mind, it shuts things out, and then people get profound experiences. But then when they come back, however, sometimes people are able to sort of provide a you might say a structured or logical explanation to what they had, but not necessarily. To some people it's just they have this experience, and I think that could be valuable enough, even if it's a temporary thing, to experience that there is so much more to reality than our compartmentalized minds would normally allow. And
it's interesting. I like that. The compartmentalized mind really is very apropos in describing it, because we are sort of stuck in our ways and our thought process, because we deal with a very tangible world based on the stimuli that we receive from our senses, and it's limited only to those physical senses, the five physical senses, and we rarely traverse into that other realm to which you speak. But there's great value in that, because I think it would open people up to the idea of possibilities that we may not even have entertained yet. We might be pushing a rock up a hill like Sisyphus, and we're not getting where we need to get because we're treading in using the same tried and true tools that don't always work necessarily. But it seems like a fascinating discover. And why is it that is it the pineal gland that is so involved in this? Why is it that gland in particular, as opposed to other parts of the brain?
Yeah, well, my explanation is then really that the pineal gland is the center is located in the center of the brain,
right?
And it's the only unpaired organ of the brain. It's unpaired. So what I look upon it is that it is an anchoring point for this compartmentalized brain, mind that we download.
I see.
There must be an anchoring point. Otherwise, there is some kind of order to how our brains are compartmentalized, and so it's anchored there. Geometry is anchored in the pineal gland, and what I believe happens when you take a psychedelics is that the mind is temporarily disengaged.
I see. Yeah.
And there are biochemical processes that create that disengagement of the mind from the brain. That's how I look upon it, and it's also. One thing that strikes me as interesting when it comes to the pineal gland, and there are many interesting things, but one is that it holds crystals. It's one of the few parts of the human body, the only crystals otherwise that I know the human body normally has are in the inner ear. But also the pineal gland has calcite crystals. And that to me is sort of makes sense that it's a crystalline structure that can download these.
Right, just like a crystal radio, it can receive and transmit.
Yeah. Right. And when you think about it, also this center of the earth is a crystal. I mean, it's crystalline and it has hexagonal crystals, and these calcite. The calcite crystals are also hexagonal, and the way I look upon it is that our heads or our brains are then really microcosms of the earth,
right?
And there is a resonance developed between them, and I think this kind of crystal may be part of that, and also that's where the mind that we download needs to be centered in order for our thinking, so to speak.
Yeah, it does make sense because the fact that it's crystalline does allow that sort of that it becomes then a conduit to tap into the information. And when you say it's not paired, that means it's a solo by itself?
Yeah. Most of the other parts, if you have the hypothalamus or the brain halves, they're paired. Most of them, or all of them, all the other parts of the brain are paired.
I see.
Left brain and right brain half.
Right, that's true.
Hypothalamus, hypophysis, and so forth.
Hippocampus,
Yeah, but not the pineal gland. It's not paired.
Mm. And the role of the pineal gland is to serve as like you said, as a transmitter and a receiver. But in the role of the physical body, what's the role of the pineal gland?
Well, what is known about his normal function is that it secretes melatonin, and so which is a hormone that determines essentially or stimulates us to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. So it does so because it monitors the light intake, and so that's the reason that we go to sleep in the night and we stay up in the day, so to speak. So that melatonin hormone is secreted by the pineal gland. And of course, that's our daily rhythm, so it's connected to pretty much everything else that goes on in the body. And
our circadian rhythm, yeah. Is it also the gland that determines our our natural functions, such as fight or flight? Is that also part of that or not? Or survival?
I have not heard that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I didn't know. I just was wondering.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in that regard because it does have it's vital then to have that gland there to it's like the operating system for the body in some ways.
Yeah,
Central.
It is, and it is also, and if you believe like I do that this center is connected to the center of the universe, center of the Earth, and then center of the galaxy, and then center of the universe, then that means that it's become some kind of a connection point between our entire bodies and their rhythms and the cosmic center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible because like you say, the we are a microcosm of the microcosm.
Yeah.
And so we are a mirror of all the same things. So we are a miniature universe within ourselves. Correct?
Yeah. I would say.
Yeah. Interesting. In your work with this, were you in a guided sort of situation, or was this a solo operation when you were doing this? You would operate within a group of people, right?
Yeah, right. No, it wasn't solo. I wouldn't. Well, I would be very cautious to do it solo.
I think so too. Yeah.
So this was done in the ayahuasca ceremonies were done in Maloca in outside of Iquitos in Peru in the Amazonas with a shaman who's been working with these kind of plants for forever, I was going to say, and yeah, you do. I did it in a group setting, and you one by one you get to drink a couple of centiliters of this tea that tastes awful, and right, you would not, you wouldn't seek it out.
Right, exactly, yeah.
No. And then it takes 40 minutes, and then you throw up, and then you hallucinate, if that's the word, or have visions for about 4 hours or so. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, the shaman checks everybody out and comes back to the group.
And during that time that you're in that state, are you aware that you are in a state like that? I mean, can you recognize that you're in this state, and are you just more sort of being receptive to, like you say, you're getting a download?
Right. No, in this case with the ayahuasca, I at least, and I think that's true for most, you are actually an observer. You you do. I was aware that this is an altered reality, and I was even aware that I'll come back to my default state at some point in time. So at least that's my experience.
Yeah.
That I was
And did you have any
observed.
lingering? Did you have any lingering thoughts? I mean, can you remember that experience in your own mind and the vivid and the vitality and the vivid memories of that?
Yeah, pretty much. A lot of it, anyway. Of course, I did probably 12 ceremonies like that, and that means a lot of things gets to happen, and a lot of it can't be put in words
Right.
because it defies our logic, and then it becomes harder to remember. But I made notes after it, and
Right, you
so
kind of have to capture that moment while you still have it in you, right? And
yeah.
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 And how did you think that it changed your view? Did it alter your view of life going forward?
I think it has lightened me up, just generally speaking. It's one thing to sort of more theoretically know that there is a spirit world, and another to actually experience it. And so that's one thing. And I think I have a more relaxed relationship to death at this point.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, you're not as fearful of it.
Well, I wasn't afraid. I mean, it's not that I went around being afraid of dying in general, but I didn't. I simply didn't think about death.
Right.
But now, no, it's not. It's not that dramatic thing. I have a more relaxed relationship.
Do you
to
think
it.
you gained insight into what it might be like to die?
Yeah, well, a possible insight. Yeah. So.
Right.
Who knows if it's right or not? But
Right.
it's like you get to taste of what it might be like.
A possibility.
And,
A possibility.
Yeah,
Maybe it's not as fearful as we thought.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a fascinating subject because it's so complex and it's so intriguing, and it seems like it would be such a. I mean, I wonder if people, if they didn't do it in a guided situation like that, if it would be harmful. But I think that that's something no one knows. I guess it depends. I mean, you really want to be around someone who knows what they're doing, I'd imagine at the time. But it's interesting that these tap into this area and then brings us to a place where we understand this sort of geometric logic of the earth, which is all tied to mathematics. And it might even explain, how the earth came to be in some ways. I mean, where did we come from? We don't wake up one day and here we are. It has to be some sort of evolutionary process that's involved in that. Yeah. And it's interesting because these and the fact that it happened across so many different cultures at the same time does make it feel almost as if it's like there's some sort of divine intervention here. Because why would a similar set of instructions be given out to people in different parts of the world, and how did that derive? That's fascinating to me because somebody had to, like you say, taste this stuff and it didn't taste good and it made them sick. So how would they know to take it?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, very interesting. It's just it is a your work is valuable in a sense that it provides a possible answer for us, and we are all searchers. I think at some point in our life we all are searching for something. That's why people study astrology. They study all kinds of different modalities, and we're all looking for a sort of an answer as to why we are where we are and how will we get to where we want to get. And it's that sort of that the great unknown, I guess, is what it is. And I think this sort of allows us to get closer to that great unknown and perhaps approach it with a sense of ease, as you say. You're more relaxed, perhaps, as a result. You're not as fearful, perhaps, of the outcome of what life might be, as we sometimes may be. And we get wound up by our minds. Our minds are very busy, and it's easy to the monkey mind, as the Buddhists call it. The monkey mind gets very busy, and we can easily go down these long places that we don't want to go, and it's very difficult. And this might offer a soothing approach to that. But we've run out of time, unfortunately. A fascinating discussion, Dr. Calleman. Thank you so much. I know we just sort of rambled, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to ramble, and I wanted to understand what you're coming from, and I think we've got a good introduction. My guest today has been Dr. Carl Johan Calleman, and he has just completed a book. Well, his book is out now. It's called the. I'm just trying to get the title on my page here. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I quote it properly. The Quantum Science of Psychedelics: The Pineal Gland, Multidimensional Reality, and the Mind Cosmology. And his website is www.calleman.com. That's CALLEMAN.com. And I encourage you to look there if you're curious at all about this. This is a scientific approach. There's another person out there that's done, a lot of people have done work on this recently. So this is a very interesting thread that you've woven here with the mind cosmology, because they seem to be so much a part of the root of this, and they may very well be, at the source of where this all began, which is I find to be fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a great pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Chris.
And
I enjoyed it.
Very good.
Talk.
Yeah, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.